Good evening, everybody. I'm Suman here from Delhi. I hope you are fine there. So I'm happy to share with you some of the experiences we have had from the DNDi India office perspective, especially in the regional context. So Natalie, my colleague, has introduced you to the DNDi model and what we have been doing in the last 15 years. In the next 8 to 10 minutes, I would like to give you a brief introduction of how we are based in the regions and how and give you some couple of examples of the projects which we have been engaged since the inception of DNDi. So as mentioned earlier, it's the primary focus of DNDi is a patient needs based R&D. So we put patients first in deciding what we want to develop and what we want to deliver. And most of the times we are looking at developing safe, effective, and affordable treatments which are very well adapted to be used in those places where the patients are situated, especially in the remote settings, say, for example, in leishmaniasis in the state of Bihar, or you are talking of sleeping sickness in Congo, and similarly in other countries. So this is a very important concept which DNDi takes it very seriously in developing and designing its projects. Now, for that very reason, when it was established in 2003, we have 6 partners plus WHO. And if you see, 4 of the founding partners are coming from endemic countries in Latin America and Asia, Southeast Asia, and Africa, and also represented by public institutes in these countries. So one of the belief was that to have a sustainable R&D in the diseases which are of neglect, you need to have leadership coming from these endemic countries, for the innovation. And this was, and I must say that the experience of DNDi working with these partner institutes has been a very strong and very supportive in and mutually to build and support each other's projects. Now, we have our head office in Geneva, but this is just to show you that we have also established 8 regional offices. And in India, we have been there since the beginning, and many of the countries, many of the offices were established in the beginning, but we added on as per the needs. Now, what you would notice, as was mentioned in Natalie's presentation, is we have a very minimum number of people, a core group of people working in these offices, but we do work a lot with the partners, even in the regions, and and that is the probably one of the key strengths of the DNDi model is to build up these partnerships to and harness and leverage the expertise which is already existing there. It may be from the private sector or it may be from public sector or academia. Now, so uh, it is very challenging to conduct clinical studies. That was what we started off with the existing drugs which were available at that time. And so we had to build capacity. And other than developing treatments, this is another key pillar in our mission is to build the capacity in these countries to be able to do the studies. So it's not only coming and doing a project and moving out once you have the results, but to build up the capacity of the researchers and also the infrastructure so that you can have a continuity of research. May not be totally related only to DNDi, but they may also continue to work in other areas. And for example, at the moment, about 1/3 of our collaboration partnerships are in institutions are based in lower and middle income countries. And especially in Africa and Latin America, we have in the beginning to start doing this collaborative clinical trials. We founded platforms where we could get different stakeholders right from the national programs and patients, representatives, clinicians, to scientific researchers and scientists from the region who could all come together and and sharing ideas and also guiding DNDi to develop the target product profile and also to help in the conduction of these clinical trials. So this has been another key I would say, a strength of building up these platforms. And in the sense, it does also help in the access is as you have involved all the different stakeholders in the decision making process. And when you have a final product, it is much easier to introduce and adapt by the country programs, because most of these diseases are managed by the country programs. So it becomes much more easy when you have them on board from the beginning itself, and when they consider themselves to be a part of this process. In this process, there has been, as usual, we expect that we have to build capacities in these regions, in the different institutes, and this has all been based on the needs. For example, in India, when we started with leishmaniasis, we already had very good established clinical sites where they could do the research. But in, say, for example, in Congo or in some parts in Africa and Latin America, we had to build these sites and centers. Now, I would like to share with you with a couple of examples of the projects. Now, this was basically when we started in India. Kala-azar is it's a parasitic disease, and it affects the poorest of the poor. And India was the epicenter of the world, where more than 50% of the reported cases worldwide was coming from one state in India called Bihar. Now, the treatments that were being used at that time was pentavalent antimonials, which was in use since the 1930s. And the problem was of these treatments was it was not only very difficult to administer intramuscular injections for 30 days, but also it was very toxic because of the heavy metals, causing cardiotoxicity and even deaths. And also 60% of the parasites were found to be resistant in Bihar. So there was several PDPs who had worked to look at existing drugs like miltefosine, paromomycin, and over in the last 10, 50, and last 20 years, so they came up with these drugs, and also single and ambisome, which was a liposomal amphotericin B, which was made available at very affordable prices by WHO. So WHO in 2010, they recommended that we should not be using monotherapy because we have a very limited number of treatments for Kala-azar. We should try to use combinations, or you use single dose ambisome as in the because you use one dose and you have a compliance of 100%. So DNDi, along with its partners, we wanted to see how we could use the existing drugs to make more effective, shorter, and safer regimes. So we started with phase 3 studies, which started from 2008 to 10, where we could show that the different combinations were having excellent efficacy. Then what happens was when you do these phase 3 studies, you are doing it in specialized centers, but then the national programs have to be implemented through the primary healthcare center and the district hospitals, which may not be as equipped as those specialized centers. So we then demonstrated that these drugs were equally safe and effective in Bihar and in Bangladesh, in these centers, and then that helped to change the national guidelines in India and Bangladesh and Nepal. However, because there was an elimination program in South Asia for Kala-azar, there were other areas which were not having a high burden, but they were very important for the success of the elimination program. For example, a skin sequelae called PKDL, which is a reservoir for continuing transmission, and then HIV-VL co-infections, which required a different regime for treatment. So along with partners like MSF and in the RMRI and BHU, we worked in the last few years. We have been looking at better regimes, especially combination regimes with the existing drug. However, one thing, as Natalie showed you in the last slide with the portfolio, there is a rich portfolio of new chemical entities, which some of them have moved into the clinical development. And the target product profile of these new chemical entities, they are oral treatments, which are very short course oral and very safe treatments, and not only for Kala-azar in South Asia, but from the global perspective, or even for other in cutaneous leishmaniasis, it has been shown to be effective. So now we are looking at developing these new treatments for the future, because Kala-azar is going to remain, the transmission is going to continue, or we will have less number of patients, but the patients will continue to need better treatments. So along with clinical development, I must say that we had a very rich experience to interact with many partners, including the national programs and also other research institutes, which was an integral part of our partnership for clinical development. But also there was other partners like the projects like Kalakor, supported by DFID, Speak India, PATH, and where we could also look at other areas, for example, access. Now, one of the challenges is that even with the evidence we have with these better regimes like miltefosine, paromycin, there is still a challenge of having a good supply of miltefosine, which is quality assured, because there's only one manufacturer and they have not been able to give the right amounts, provide the right amounts, or the price is very high. So we are also looking at how do we get Indian generics to get interested into developing quality assured and WHO pre-qualified miltefosine. So these are also being beyond just doing research. We are also looking at sustaining the access so that the access cycle can be continued. And we also have been involved with WHO, the Regional Technical Advisory Group, the Ministry of Health expert group. So this has been a very rich experience for us, and also we have been able to contribute. Now, what has been the outcome? I must say that there are cases, for example, from 17,000 cases in India a decade ago. Now we are having less than 3,000 cases. Uh, Now, I just want to give another example is of pediatric HIV. Now, HIV drugs have been, developed and it's accessible for adults, but the formulations for the children really lag behind. And if you look at the burden of children, there are about 1.7 million children living worldwide with HIV infections. That is in 2018, and it's 90% of these infections are in sub-Saharan Africa. India being having a large population, we have the third largest population of HIV patients, but it is much had created some targets to achieve. And if you look at them for example, by 2018, we should have reduced new HIV infections children to less than 40,000 per year. But what was achieved in 2017 is on only 180,000. So this was lagging far behind what was achieved in the adults. And one of the reasons was that the formulations which is available, for example, you had to use a combination of 4 drugs, and they were all in separate syrups, and some of them was very unpalatable with a bitter taste, and also containing almost 40% alcohol, to be administered to very young infants, even 1 year or 6 months old. They required refrigeration, and it was difficult to store them and also to transport them, especially for mothers who had to travel and who had to take them to some other places. So this was, and the result was that the children, also in spite of these treatments, were not having a very effective outcome. Now, Cipla had developed a two-in-one lopinavir ritonavir pellets in 2016. Now, and this was combined with a dispersible tablet of abacavir and lamivudine. So DNDi was involved in conducting clinical trials in East Africa to show that there is a benefit above the previous Galetra regime, the syrups. And however, if you look at the challenges which we have, we when we developed the target product profile, we wanted to develop 4 drugs in one formulation so that it would be very easy for the mothers to administer them, and it could be easily, that could be administered, opened up very easily in capsules and put in the milk or water. So this was the target product profile. It had to be taste mask. You had to be able to store it in the room temperature, and then we have developed this in 2019, and we have now earlier this year submitted to the FDA for registration with Cipla. Cipla was our industrial partner. So this is what an example to show that although you have a disease which is mainly affecting Africa, having a regional office in India has helped to also find the right partner who would be able to develop a formulation, who would be interested to partner with DNDi. So lastly, what I would like to say, this is the last slide, is what we have seen seen over the last 15 years is there has been an evolution in the countries where we are working. Just to take you for you, for example, in India, India has a very strong pharmaceutical industry. The biotech and the R&D, institutes are also emerging to be top leaders, and there is also from the public institute leadership, there is a leadership to innovate in the country itself. So now we are looking at how do we how do we evolve ourselves within DNDi to be able to harness these ambitions in the region. And so what we are looking at is building the leadership in the regions, especially in this middle income countries like India, Malaysia, Brazil, which also have India offices there, retained India offices there, and also to work in a very matrix management for the projects, having leadership also based in the regions, and at the same time ensuring that we have a common business plan. I mean, the one DNDi business plan, so that we are all focused and we can utilize the expertise wherever they are based. Either they are based in Africa or in Geneva or in India, so we can work very together. So this is something which we are really working on, and this is probably one of the in the next 10 or 15 years we would see DNDi evolve into a different partnership model with having more leadership roles coming from the regions as compared to the previous 15 years. Thank you very much for your audience.
Thank you very much, Suman. That's been really interesting. Fantastic presentation, and also again ties in quite acutely with one of the major principles of the WHO NTD roadmap that was just discussed, presented by Mwele on Tuesday, and we discussed at length within WHO that, moving forward, there must be a lot of regional ownership and leadership in disease control. So that it was a perfect place to end on. And also in the questions, we've had a couple participants asking, for example, Stephen Bramer was asking, is it possible to extend your platform to West Africa? So you've gone definitely part of the way to explaining that. Is there anything specific that you would like to highlight given that context?
Well, I would probably ask Natalie to answer that question because she has been working mostly in Africa regions. So probably these platforms have been disease centric to start with. For example, the East African LEAP is the Leishmaniasis East African platform. So I would guess that as per the needs and as we move into more diseases in the portfolio, there would be a natural tendency to also include the other relevant countries in Africa. But I would leave Natalie to maybe give a more specific answer there.
Thank you, Suman. So thank you for the question. I think for now we have a platform in Central Africa with for sleeping sickness. The way we develop the platforms is really based on the diseases that we are trying to find solutions for and where the actors would be. And so for now, maybe with the future of the work we are doing in onchocerciasis, there will be need to expand indeed to West Africa.
Back to diagnostics with Narayan Raj Attarai's question. Diagnostics are being challenged during COVID-19, particularly in LMICs. Support to developing laboratory platforms for NTDs could be shared to combat other problems of infectious diseases. And so what would you recommend, or what would you see as the best way to go about building and developing that capacity?
Right. Thank you, Narayan. Yes, I agree with you that having only have a drug is sometimes not sufficient enough, especially when you want to make it available at the point of care. And having especially point of care diagnostics has been crucial. So we have in the last couple of few years, we have been trying to collaborate with organizations which are primarily focused on diagnostics. For example, FIND, and also we are looking at looking at the local partners who have been developing. So we have been working with ICMR Institute, which have been developing a local LAMP. This is a simplified nucleic acid amplification platform. So this would definitely be a key focus for DNDi in the next few years, to try to look at how we also develop point of care tests, especially as we would need them for the new drugs which we are going to develop.
Brilliant. Thank you, Suman and Natalie. We do have a few more questions, but I'm just keeping an eye on the time. And so perhaps we'll take a few minutes to move to our next speaker, Professor Philippe Guérin, Director of the Infectious Diseases Data Observatory, who will give us a brief introduction about IDDO, as well as some of the challenges on the data side of things, to the work that you're undertaking.